Grew up in Orlando. She remembers seeing at least one alligator in the lake across from her childhood home. She has edited historical books at the Institute of Early American History in Williamsburg, Virginia, and Stanford University Press in Palo Alto, California. From 2000 to 2023, she wrote the weekly Florida Flashback feature in the Orlando Sentinel about different aspects of Central Florida's past. She's also the author of 3 nonfiction books about Central Florida's history, including Orlando, City of Dreams, and a mystery novel set in Orlando in the late 1940s entitled Secrets of the Flamingo Cafe. Please join me in thanking Joy Dickinson and bring Joy forward.
I'm so excited to tell you about Mabel Norris Reese, and I bet a lot of you probably already know about her, but it's the reason this came up. It was in an email exchange with David Nolan, and he was pointing out oftentimes it's great to talk about authors and writers who come from the area where we're having a conference. And I think you mentioned Mabel, but another one is, just I'll mention in passing, is Pat Frank, who wrote the novel Alas, Babylon. You know, the great apocalyptic novel about a nuclear war. And the town that he set that story in, which was published in 1959 and has been adapted many times, was based on Mount Dora. And he wrote it in Mount Dora, although he lived in other places in Florida and Jacksonville. So he's a great story too. But Mabel is come to really be honored in Mount Dora. Mount Dora has really come together to honor her because she was the owner of a weekly newspaper here starting in 1947, and almost single-handedly at the time she really took on Sheriff Willis McCall and the KKK. McCall was sheriff here for 8 terms from 1944 to 1977, and I have props somewhere, but I left them back there, but they're basically Gilbert King's books. And if you know Devil in the Grove by Gilbert King, published in 2012, won the Pulitzer Prize, and the next book, Beneath a Ruthless Sun, published in 2018, he was responsible in a lot of ways for bringing the story of Mabel Norris Reese and her work to public acknowledgement again. So we'll talk about that a little bit in the future, but you will see a Mabel if you go on your walk, I think, I hope, because one of the notable things about her is that in 2021, a statue, it's actually a bust on a pedestal of her, was unveiled in Sunset Park, and it's just a couple blocks away. If you go out in front of the hotel and turn right and went up Alexander Street, you'll see it on a corner, and we'll have some pictures of it here, so you'll see what it looked like too. That was paid for by a crowdfunding effort. It had sponsors and everything, but a great community effort to honor her. And this is a rarity. I think these days figurative sculptures of any kind are a rarity, but the folks who were behind the sculpture point out on their website that their statistics were of like 5,200 sculptures of people, real people, not allegorical people or, the Fates or something, across the United States, say 5,200, about 500 of them were of women. So we do in Florida, we're lucky enough to have, now we have Mary McLeod Bethune representing Florida in the statuary collection at the National Capitol, but it's rare to have a statue of a woman. I think one of the only other ones I know of in Lake County is Annie Oakley, which is another interesting story. So here is Mabel in her train.
Ma Barkley.
Pardon?
Ma Barkley.
Yeah.
Oh, is there a statue of her?
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, we can think about that.
She was killed in Lake Weir.
Oh yeah. Well,
Get on that, Terry.
here we see Mabel wearing her trademark glasses, which King always referred to as her bebop her bebop glasses, which of course they weren't at the time. That's how we think of it looking back. That was a good 50s style. And let's see, I gotta point at this to advance. No, I'm gonna turn it around.
There you go. Oh, there's a couple.
There we go. Okay, this is another Mabel Norris Reese, M.R., Margaret Kennan Rawlings, M.R. Coincidence? Maybe. I don't know. But I think these two ladies have some more things in common than you might think ordinarily when I started thinking about it, and that was one of the things that sort of I just thought I'd mention in passing. Now, Marjorie's sort of almost a generation older than Mabel Norris Reese. Marjorie was born in 1896, and Mabel was born in 1914, almost a generation, 18 years. But they both started out in journalism, and at a time when for both, even though one was much later than the other, starting to work for newspapers, women were pretty much relegated to the women's pages. But I think even though, our Marjorie started using her journalistic skills, her skills of observation and love of the language, and to create fiction and nonfiction essays, Mabel continued in journalism. But I think both of them, you can see similarities between their passion for or interest in people of rural Florida, people who were somewhat left behind, the affinity for the underdog, confrontation with racism in Florida and the rural life, and also an affinity for natural Florida. Mabel became a great fisherwoman in her life. So I was talking about being limited to the women's page. I think this is particularly interesting.
Oh, no.
This is a young Mabel. This is a woman who took on the Klan later on, and could just eat bullets. She had so much determination. So here she is beginning as like a young woman in her 20s, and this is her assignment. What do they call it? The poundage derby. And Mabel is the one standing up. She's supposedly trying to lose weight, and the other woman is trying to gain weight. And the copy really did referred to her as the more rotund sob sister. So, she was a reporter at two papers in Akron, the Akron Times-Press and the Akron Beacon Journal, and she started out really young. But I think it's not surprising that this was 37, by 10 years later, 47, she had married her husband, Paul Reese, and they decided to come to Florida and buy a paper. I'm not sure if they saw the paper for sale and moved because of that, but I suspect they did. So they came to Mount Dora and bought this weekly paper. Some of us were talking about changes in journalism last night, which is a huge topic, but I was shocked to realize I read a description in one of King's books about how they put out the weekly in Mabel's and Paul's time. When it was a weekly, they mailed it out, and Wednesday was their big day, and she would get up at 4 a.m. and go into the office, which was on Donnelly Street. There's a picture of it on their website, Remember Mabel, which I'll show you later on too, but I haven't exactly figured out where it was. But anyway, she'd come into the office and get everything all set up with galley corrections, and then the linotype operator would set the paper, and late that night, they printed on a press that a 72-year-old woman, she was the widow of the former pressman, would hand feed the sheets of this paper through. It standing over the hot press and everything. So that's how it was done in those days. So she thought it was, she said later she thought Mount Dora was just a little bit of heaven when she first came here. A charming town with its Victorian houses and everything. And she worked really hard, she and Paul both. And the first things that they wrote, or that she wrote, were just sort of the meat and potatoes of a weekly, small town weekly like that. She wrote breezy profiles of residents like Elmira Loader, Mount Dora's only flying saucer expert, and reports of soccer, Little League soccer, and city council meetings, and stuff about the snowbirds that came down for the shuffleboard courts, which I think are real near us, I think. And all that, but all that changed. So they're here in 47, and in 1949 something changes that's going to change her life, which is the case that the King's book, The Devil in the Grove, is built around, the case of the Groveland Four, which began in July 1949 when a 17-year-old white woman who was married, Norma Paget, accused 4 young black men of rape. And so what a saga this is, and if a lot of you probably know about it, it's now very famous in Florida and nationally, but that case brought her into the orbit of Sheriff McCall, who'd been elected in 44, so he was sort of beginning his period of influence, his reign. So 1949, it all begins, and at first Mabel is sort of swept up in the, here's a picture of young Mabel too, from the Women's Hall of Fame. But here we get to coverage of the Groveland Four. This is Sheriff McCall on the left in his trademark white Stetson, and he often wore a string tie. I think this was coverage by Life magazine about the case later on, and the man in the white short sleeved shirt he was Norma Paget's husband, I think. Anyway, this was Life magazine, Time magazine both covered the case. First, Mabel is swept up with everybody else, all the white people anyway in the area, and thinking that this was a horrible thing, that these men certainly were guilty. The Sentinel particularly covered itself in shame, by printing a cartoon on the front page of 4 electric chairs and calling for their execution. But that was sort of the sentiment. The Sentinel has since apologized for that very publicly later on. But that was, the assumption, these young men are guilty. And there was sort of, one of them was killed almost immediately, tried to escape and was killed by a mob. So that left 3, and they were convicted. The youngest was just convicted of life in prison. The other 2 who were older were convicted of death, and that conviction was overturned by the Supreme Court, how it was handled and everything. So they were brought back for a retrial, and in November 1951, McCall himself said that he would go get them from Rayford to bring them back to Lake County for retrial, which he chose to do at night, driving back on a lonely one-way road. And, at the end of that night, both of those young men were on the ground shot. It was assumed both of them were dead. One of them, Walter Irvin, played dead and wasn't dead, and survived to tell FBI investigators that McCall had shot them, and one of the deputies too. I think there were just 2 men in the car. So that's the photo that's on the cover of, McCall that's on the cover of Devil in the Grove. Well, that was a real turning point for Mabel. She realized what had happened. She was horrified. She vowed that she was never going to be taken in by McCall again, that she was going to fight for justice and against the racism that was so prevalent. So she really suffered for it too. And it beginning especially in May 1954, after the Supreme Court decision in Brown v. Board, which mandated the segregation of schools in. And I think, it's easy to forget what a huge reaction against that there was in the South. I mean, in Orlando, that was 1954. I know at least in Orange County, the schools really didn't become integrated until like 1971. There were all these legal tactics and feelings that separate but equal was still okay and everything. So when the decision came out, though, Mabel wrote an editorial praising it and siding with the decision, which was a really, here in 1954, was a courageous thing to do. And McCall really began to hate her and called her Red Mabel. This was just the time of the McCarthy era and all the communist scares. So as things went on in the middle 50s, she was terrorized. She and her family were terrorized by the Klan. They had dead fish dumped on the steps. They had crosses burned in the yard, which was one of which almost set the house on fire. So I think the worst thing they did was poison their dog. And she was writing editorials all the time, and in one of them she said something, I guess it was after a cross burning, I'm not, we have a watchdog, if they knew we had, our watchdog, who was a nice chow mix named Cubby. These whoever was doing this, these guys put poisoned meat out for Cubby. It was just tough. They were ostracized. They found that they couldn't really go to the social places that they used to go to. But Mabel didn't give up. She kept up with her editorials, and there were a couple of cases that are particularly notable. One was the case of this family, the Platt family, in the mid-50s. The Platt family had moved to Mount Dora in search of work and everything, and this was at the time that the laws, I'm not sure I think it was the whole state. If it was claimed that you had one drop of Negro blood, you were considered a black person and couldn't go to school, couldn't go to the public schools. So this family said that they were, later on, that they were of Native American Indian ancestry, and they had lived in the Carolinas, I think. And they had a lot of documentation of that, but they were not allowed to go to school, and McCall treated them in a tremendously disrespectful way, went to see the family and said, I don't like the way that child, I don't like the way the nose of that child looks. Just unbelievable. So, she persisted and continued their cause when hardly anybody else would. And in the end, they ended up moving, but they were able to go to school for a time in a private Bible school. Sorry about this, I keep sending it the wrong way. The third in the case that Gil King's book, Beneath a Ruthless Sun, focuses on is the case of Jesse Daniels, who was white, 19 at the time it started in 1957. His family were agricultural workers. They picked melons in the hot sun all day. Both his parents, his father was quite a bit older than his mother, and they were both had severe health problems and couldn't work. He was mentally disabled. He didn't go to school after 5th grade. Everybody knew him. He was considered a real sweet kid, the boy on the bike. He would run errands for people and everything. And after a white 31-year-old socialite housewife in a prominent family said she had been raped, Jesse was who Willis McCall decided should take the blame for that. I mean, not just Jesse, but other people too. It's just a very fascinating but disturbing story. This man was sent to Chattahoochee without a trial or anything Chattahoochee Mental Institution in North Florida for 14 years. While his mother, you see the back of his mother, Pearl, there, just refused to give up on him and kept on fighting, and Mabel kept on fighting and trying to, you know, take legal means and all kinds of means to get him released, which he eventually was. In the meantime, Mabel got very close to Pearl Daniels, the mother, and in the end, ended up helping her find work later on. Here's just a story in the St. Pete Times along the way about just one of the bombings that Mabel and her family endured. So by 1960, you know, things were really hard here. Mabel and her husband Paul Reese decided to divorce. They divorced, and she moved to Daytona and got a job at the News Journal there as a reporter. They had one child I forgot to mention who, yeah, they had a little girl who was going through all these bombings and the poisoning of the dog and everything too. And Mabel and her daughter Patricia moved to Daytona, and she kept on as a reporter of at the Daytona Beach News Journal. And because of all of her work fighting for civil rights and everything, she was assigned stories to interview Martin Luther King, for example, when he came to St. Augustine in 1963, and covered all the troubles in St. Augustine. And she interviewed him a couple of times and did that, you know, wrote about that situation in St. Augustine and the riots. And this was the time when, I don't know if you remember, there was a swim-in where one of the motel owners there poured the acid in the... So she covered that, and she was also appointed to the Florida Advisory Committee for Civil Rights at the time. If reporters won't go out and investigate abuses, fight for causes, who will, she said. Now, she reported until 1977 when she retired. During that time, she helped Pearl Daniels, who was sort of isolated after Jesse, at the time that Jesse was still in the hospital and her husband had died, and Mabel helped Pearl come to Daytona Beach and find a job. So she continued to be very involved in that family. And, as I said, it was sort of the publication of King's book, particularly this one, which really focuses on her. She is one of the main characters that brought her story to light again in 2018. And she considered, King says, even though, you know, she was very proud of the work that she did interviewing King and writing about that it was the cases in Lake County, particularly the Daniels case, where he was exonerated and released and everything, that she was the proudest of. This is Jesse late in his life. Gil King took this picture. He died in 2018. And King also wrote an obituary of him for the Daytona Beach News Journal. So about the time the book came out, or a little after, this was when the community effort started in Mount Dora to honor Mabel with a sculpture. There was a committee led by Gary McKechnie, an author and activist here in Mount Dora, who raised the money and persisted in doing. They found Jim McNallis is a sculptor, I think, based in Fort Lauderdale, but all around the world to do it. And you'll see here he's making the terracotta. It started with a terracotta bust, which you actually form, and you can see in the back all the pictures that he used of her, since he sort of did a composite and everything. He used the glasses. Put her in the glasses. We saw one picture of her without the glasses, but usually it's always the glasses. And he put this is the margin release key. I don't know if it's from her typewriter or just a typewriter, and that's M.R. Yeah, Marjorie Rawlings, Mabel Reese. It's on this. You'll see it's on the statue. So he did it in terracotta, but then a bronze was made of it, and it's the bronze bust that's in the park near here. And here's the dedication of it in September 24, 2021. There was a big crowd, cheering it on. There were 2 dedications actually. About a year before, in 2020, there was a thing to sort of unveil the terracotta bust, and then it was cast in bronze and placed in the park. I think, just to orient you, I think that yellow building behind the railroad sign is the Lakeside Inn. It's just sort of a straight shot down there.
Indeed, yes.
So you'll see there she is with everybody taking pictures with their phones and everything. A rock star. Long after her. And there it is up close. Well, you can see the MR
yes.
the MRP. So, if you want to know more about her, a good site is this I've mentioned a couple times, remembermabel.com. It's easy to remember. On there, you can sign a petition. I think it's still active. Gary McKegney put it on the website in 2022, excuse me. But it's a petition to have Mabel honored as member of the Florida Women's Hall of Fame, which doesn't seem to be going very far at this point because, I don't know, they seem to find other people that are more worthy. But anyway, we want to keep up that effort. And lovely picture, I think that was probably part of the life shoot when they were here, the life photo shoot. Her granddaughter is Cindy Chesley Erickson, is about 60 now, I think. I've heard her speak a couple of times. She's really done a good job of sort of carrying on her grandmother's legacy. She remembers her grandmother really well and, knew her very well and was part of her. And Cindy said that Mabel would want this recognition, this kind of recognition, to highlight the power that dogged determination and the written word have to change the world. And I think Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings would agree with that too. So, thank you.